Welcome, Redemption. Woo, it's good to be back. Wow, well, to everyone in the house and to all our family watching online, it is awesome to be together. It's good also, it is good to start with the end in mind. To start with the end in mind. If you are building IKEA furniture, say, and you got those pieces in your hand, it's helpful to know whether you're building a kitchen table versus a bunk bed, right? To have the end in mind. Or if you're going on a road trip somewhere, the first thing you want to do is decide on your destination. To set the GPS coordinates and your Google Maps, whatever, and set up, hey, here's where we're going. Here's the end that we have in mind. My family, we are going on a road trip soon. Normally every July, we go back to Oregon to see our family and friends are back home. And this summer, our July vacation was postponed. We postponed it, just obviously COVID, everything happening nationally, all that was going on. But we postponed it, and now we're getting ready to go and see our family. And normally we'd feel ready to fly, but we have some family members who are older, who have some health concerns, and so we're actually going to drive there and then fly back. And as we get ready to drive, the first thing I'm going to do, when we sit down in the car, bags are packed, car's stocked, we kind of sit down, very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the GPS. Right? I'm going to type in the coordinates. Hey, here's where we're going. Here's our destination. And knowing that destination can be helpful, because there are going to be parts of it's a long drive, it's like 20 hours, right? So there are going to be times that we're driving through exciting cities, there are going to be times we're going to be driving through dry wilderness, but in the car together we know, hey, here's where we're headed, here's where we're going. We have together the end in mind. Well, today, we're going to see Jesus set the GPS, so to speak, to set the GPS coordinates for his ministry. That Jesus is saying, today, here's the destination where my ministry is headed. Here's why I've come, what I've come to do, to bring, and to accomplish. We're in John chapter 2, if you have your Bible and you want to turn there. And John chapter 2 is a famous story. It's a story where Jesus turns water into wine at a wedding. John tells us in this passage, this is actually the first sign that Jesus does. And that word first, it doesn't just mean like chronologically, it's the first one that happened. It also carries associations in the original language of being like the primary sign. It's a word used for royalty, like the first among many. And so this is like Jesus' royal sign, his stamp on his ministry saying, I am locking in the GPS coordinates. This is where this thing is heading. What we're going to discover today is that Jesus has come to launch a wedding for the world, where the wine flows abundantly. That brings joy and celebration. So let's turn John 2, starting in verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Well, the first thing we see here is that Jesus sets the GPS. Jesus sets the GPS destination for his ministry. Now, I don't want you to turn to your neighbor and breathe all over him. You can keep your face mask on, but I have missed not only seeing your faces, but hearing your voices. And so if we could say together, set the GPS. That's right. Jesus is setting the GPS, his coordinates, his destination. This is where my ministry is heading. The very first thing we read out of the gate is on the third day, there was a wedding. On the third day, there was a wedding. Now, an astute reader of John might ask, John, on the third day of what? On the third day of the week? Are you trying to tell us this wedding happened on a Tuesday? On the third day of the year? Are you saying this was on January 3rd? Well, In John, this story doesn't necessarily follow after the last story. When you read through the book of John, he doesn't actually tell us the third day of what, and I think it's intentional. When you read through John, you find that he doesn't put his stories necessarily in chronological order, as rather he has a theological order, kind of a frame and a flow that he is putting things in. And one of the things that John likes to do is at the beginning of these stories, he'll often give a little clue or a detail that locks us into the bigger sign that this story is a part of. Next week, for example, we'll see he opens the story saying it was around the time of Passover. And Passover in John becomes a clue. All the Passover stories tie into his crucifixion and his death. And so the third day here is a clue, a marker that connects the story as an event, like an icon or a window into something bigger about Jesus. This raises the question, can you think of any other significant Jesus events that happen on the third day? Come on, class, anyone? Third day events, anyone? Anything that Jesus does on the third day? That's right. On the second day, there was a funeral. But on the third day, there was a wedding. On the second day, his body lay in the tomb. But on the third day, he rose again. On the second day, the enemy thought he had won. But on the third day, he discovered he couldn't keep a good man down. The second day looked like defeat. But on the third day, I saw victory. On the second day, COVID was running rampant. But on the third day, resurrection will go viral. On the second day, the nations were tearing themselves apart at the seams. But on the third day, the nations will be healed and worshiping together in reconciled glory. On the second day, I was blind. But on the third day, I could see. On the second day, I was lonely. On the third day, I found union. On the second day, the wine had all run out, and all we had left was bathwater to drink. But on the third day, the rivers started pumping Merlot and Cabernet. On the second day, his body lay on the tomb, but on the third day, he rose again. And why did he rise again? To marry his bride. On the third day, there was a wedding. Church, our destination is a resurrection wedding. This whole sign, what we're going to look at today, it is a sign that is pointing to why Christ has come, what he has ultimately come to accomplish, is a wedding where we are united with our King, and the wine will flow in abundance, bringing his joy and celebration to his people and his restored creation in the world to come. Now, this destination is helpful to remember when the road gets rough. Have any of you found the road lately going a little rough going? Maybe it feels like you ran out of gas and you're stranded on the side of the road. Or maybe you ran out of wine, like this couple, this family in the story. We read that the wine has run out at this wedding, and this is an embarrassing event for the couple and their family. It's an embarrassing event because this is the big day. Like, this is the day that their kids have been looking forward to their whole lives. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, for the parents, there were social expectations of hospitality. And they're about to be the talk of the town. Like, Twitter's going to be all ablaze, and people, oh my gosh, can you believe they ran out of wine, right? Like, this is going to be an embarrassing event for this family. Tales will probably go down in the years and decades to come. You remember when the wine ran out at this wedding? This is a disaster waiting to happen. And the truth is, like for this family, like for us, when you run out in the big important moments of life, when you feel like you've got nothing left to give, it can be embarrassing. And I know from talking with many of you, and even in my own experience, like this has been a season where I think many of us have felt like we've run out. Like we've got nothing left to give. For some, you may feel like you've run out of stamina with your kids or patience with your roommate. And it's caused you to say some things you regret. For others, maybe you have run out of endurance with your loneliness. And it's caused you to turn to some things for connection that you really places you know you shouldn't be going. For others, you've perhaps run out of hope in your condition and given in to despair. Like this family, it can be embarrassing for us when we find ourselves at a spot where we've got nothing left to give. And yet, Mary intercedes for her friend. I find it interesting here that Mary, I picture her kind of nudging Jesus with her elbow and like, hey, Jesus, can you do something about this? Can you do something for my friend? Like it's been 30 years I've been waiting. I know you are the Word become flesh. You are the light of the world who's broken into our darkness. It's this time to reveal your glory, to show what you've come to do. But Jesus responds to her. He says, woman, and that can sound rude in English sometimes, right? Like he's not saying like woman like that, right? Like our whatever condescending tone. In the original language, it's a sign of respect. It's like saying madame, right? So he's not back-talking his mom. He's showing her respect. And he says, woman, my hour has not yet come. And that phrase, my hour, shows up throughout John as a reference to his crucifixion. When his crucifixion is the moment where his glory is ultimately going to be revealed. What Jesus is essentially saying here, my hour has not yet come. We're not at the destination yet, but I'm going to give you a sign. See, like for Mary, she's essentially asking, like, are we there yet? Like, just are we there? Are we there at the moment where you're going to reveal your glory to the world? She's like that kid in the backseat of the car. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And Jesus is going, we're not there yet. We're not at the destination, but I'm going to give you a sign that points to the destination where we're heading. What we're about to see, this turning of water to wine, is a sign of what Christ's crucifixion and resurrection will accomplish. And these GPS coordinates, I believe, are significant for us as a church. This is our first Sunday for many of us back indoors here. There's a sense that this is exciting and it's good. We're back in the car together, so to speak. We're back in the same vehicle rather than kind of driving separately, talking by walkie-talkies on the road trip. You know, we're back here in the room together for many of us, and there's a sense that we're here, but where are we going? What are we oriented towards? Where is this story headed? What do we want to be about? I believe the invitation this morning is to set our GPS coordinates, to align them with Jesus, both collectively as a church and personally as individuals, to Jesus, we want to be going where you are going, that we want to be a resurrection people on a resurrection journey. And we are invited this morning to come with those areas where you feel like you've got nothing left to give. And I want to invite you, like Mary this morning, that you can nudge Jesus and say, Jesus, I know that I am not yet at that destination. I know that we are not yet at kingdom come. I know that maybe it's not yet time for the fullness of your kingdom come in glory and all creation restored. But today, can you give me a sign? Jesus, we need to experience more of you, more of your healing, more of your resurrection power, more of your transformation inside and out with your resurrection life. Jesus, can you give us a sign? Signs of resurrection. Well, let's continue in verse 6 and see the sign that Jesus gives. Now, there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. We find here that Jesus makes a Red River's worth of wine. Like Jesus makes a lot of wine, around 150 gallons, John tells us. That's about like 750 bottles. If you go to the store and you're picking out like bottles of wine, standard bottle of wine, that's about 750 bottles of wine. This wasn't grape juice. Right? Now, Jesus is not the dude who shows up at the party or the barbecue and he brings some, Doritos and leftover KFC, whatever, right? Jesus showing up at the party with 750 bottles of vintage, of the best stuff. Jesus is the life of the party. Can somebody say life of the party? Jesus is the life of the party. You want Jesus at your party. I find it interesting earlier in verse 2, it says Jesus also was invited. They wanted Jesus at their party. Jesus is a party animal, right? I'm not saying that he's getting wasted or whatever, but sometimes I think we have this picture like sour Jesus where, he'll show up to the party, but he's only there just kind of make sure, checking everyone's behavior, make sure everyone's keeping in line, dude, Kevin, should you have really told that joke? Meredith, you really need another glass? Bob and Ethel, save some room for the Holy Spirit. And no, Jesus is the life of the party. They want him here, and he brings the best. Anyone in the house. We are left with this question, though. Why does Jesus make so much wine? That's good. That's kind of overkill, right? 150 gallons. That is a lot. Why does Jesus make so much wine? I think we get some helpful backdrop in the prophecy of the Old Testament. There are a number of prophecies in places like Amos and Joel, and they say that when the Messiah comes and when he establishes his kingdom, that the rivers will run with wine. It's intriguing. Cana, the place where this miracle takes place, Cana is actually named after the Cana River that flows through this area, and it flows down and dumps into the Mediterranean Sea. And so there's an association with the rivers here. And let's look at Amos 9, verse 13 to 14, where we get this picture of the rivers, like the Cana River and the rivers of the land running with wine. It says, when the Messiah comes, the mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. They shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. It's a picture of the mountains dripping wine and the rivers flowing with it, and God bringing his abundance through restoration to the life of his people and the land. It's interesting, in Amos, the context of this passage is God rebuilding the temple. At a time where the temple being destroyed, and this foreshadowing that God will rebuild the temple on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and then the rivers will flow down from the mountains and the hills, bringing this wine like rivers through the land, this abundance. And it's interesting, John has this in mind. Here in John 2, the very next story we're going to read is about the temple torn down and rebuilt. I'm learning that the true temple, speaking of, is Jesus. Jesus is the temple who will be rebuilt on Mount Zion, and from his life, he is going to bring resurrection wine, flowing to his people and through all the land, bringing restoration to creation. Jesus didn't just come to bring us a drop of resurrection wine. He came to bring us a river of resurrection wine. Jesus did not just come to put a Band-Aid over our problems. He came to heal them from the inside out. Jesus did not just come to say, hooray, let's hang out. He came to inaugurate a party, to launch his kingdom celebration, to inaugurate the wedding with his bride. Jesus came to inaugurate his wedding that restores us in union with our Maker and brings abundance to the life of the land. Now, John gives us an interesting detail here. He says that the water is from the purification jars. The purification jars. Why that detail? You get into John, you start realizing every detail is significant. Nothing's there by chance or accident. He's putting everything in on purpose. Now, these purification jars, what they were used for was in Jewish ceremonies like weddings, big important Sacred ceremonies and festivals, these purification jars were for washing, cleansing yourself. You think about water, there's really two main uses you can do with water. One is you can drink it, and the other is you can clean with it. You can bathe or you can scrub down the counters. Water cleanses, right? And in the Jewish system, from the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the major ways for dealing with impurity were washing, with this kind of water that's set aside, with washing and with sacrifices. Sacrificial animals that took care of sin and impurity amongst the people. These were the ways. And this sign is pointing us to a greater reality, that you used to get washed with water, but now you get washed with wine. Church tradition says there are three major things that this story, this miracle at Cana, points to. One of these is Jesus' identity as God. Like, who else can turn water into wine, right? A second one is the sign of resurrection. Jesus going, hey, this is what I've come to do and to bring for my people in the world. But the third is this, that Jesus has come. This miracle shows this expansion from Judaism in the Old Covenant to Christianity in the New Covenant, the welcoming in of the Gentiles and the nations to feast and celebrate in God's kingdom. And whereas in the Old Covenant people used to get washed with waters of purification and sacrificial animals, now we get washed with wine, that Jesus' blood is what washes us clean. We sing some weird songs in Christianity, right? Like back home, I remember there was a song, a hymn that I used to sing. I love it. It's called "There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood." And that's the title. It's like the first line. And you think about it, it's actually kind of a gory song, right? Like that sounds like your neighbor who gets all, hyped up on Halloween and their front yard. They got all the crazy cobwebs, the skeleton, like this fountain filled with blood, right? But you go on and it says, sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains. It's talking about Jesus' atoning sacrifice, the power of his blood. There's another song that we often sing, nothing but the blood. Like, what can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. And you think about it, it's actually a counterintuitive image. Usually you dip something in blood and it stains it. It's actually hard to get out. It's like, how am I going to get the stain out? But the image here, though it's counterintuitive, it's powerful, going, Jesus' atonement actually is powerful to wash us and make us clean. I remember years ago there was an atheist who visited our church. It was a Christian and atheist, and they were visiting different churches together, and they were kind of writing a book where the atheist was responding to this kind of experience in church or whatever. And overall, I said, hey, they sent us the book when they were done, and overall they had a good experience in our church. That was cool. But he was like, but one thing, what's up with singing this song about blood? Like, that just seemed weird to him, right? And it would. And yet within the gospel story, we discover that Jesus' blood is powerful to wash us and make us clean. That sin has unleashed death and destruction into our world. And yet Jesus is the Lamb once slain, whose blood is powerful enough to soak up our sin, to soak up our death, to soak up our destruction, and to wash like a sponge and cleanse us and make us whole. Jesus' blood washes us clean. This is powerful because when you come to Jesus, you may feel like, man, I'm just too dirty. Like, God, if you only knew the things that I've done, the things that I've said. And yet the gospel preaches the truth. There's nothing too big that Jesus can't cleanse. Jesus' blood is stronger than Dove soap. It's stronger than Clorox bleach. Like, it can scrub us down and purify us and make us holy and make us whole to stand and celebrate in life with Christ, our King. You may find yourself saying, yeah, but I don't know if there's enough for me. I've got all these other people that maybe God's going to use it for them first. Jesus brought 150 gallons, right? Like, he's brought a resurrection river. There is plenty to cover all who desire to come and be washed, be united with him, to be made holy and clean and whole, washed in the blood of the Lamb and prepared as a bride for the wedding with our groom, Christ, our King. All right, well, let's see how this story ends. If We go on in verse 9. It says, when the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. We find here that God saves the best for last. Someone say it's best for last. God saves the best for last. Jesus is going, this is a different kind of party. This is a different kind of party. The master goes, hey, normally you go to the party and people bring out the best stuff first, right? Like people are bringing out like the 20-year cab and the vintage scotch or whatever. And then once everyone's a little bit lit, then you bring out the $2 chuck and the Mike's Hard Lemonade, right? But the master goes, you've done things backwards. You've actually saved the best for last. And this is a sign that points to the fact that Jesus is better than everything that's come before. Jesus is the best that God has saved for last. Jesus is a better sacrifice than all of the sacrifices of the Old Testament. He is a once-for-all sacrifice that covers and atones for the sin of the world. Jesus is a better cleansing agent. He washes and cleanses and purifies his people better than any water or soap or detergent or different things that could have been used before. Jesus washes and cleanses us better. Jesus brings us a better joy, inaugurates a better wedding, brings a better life for the world. Jesus is better. Jesus is better than everything that you've given yourself to. Those substances that you tried to satiate yourself with. The relationship that you thought was ultimately going to bring you meaning in life. Jesus is better. Jesus is better than that position that you thought, when I just get there, I'll have arrived. Jesus is better than all those things that we go to, that we allow to kind of captivate our heart, our affections, distract us. Ultimately, Jesus is better. Can someone say, Jesus is better? Help me preach up here, because Jesus is better. Man, all of life is all for Jesus, because Jesus is better than everything else in all of life. We find here as well that God the Father is pleased with the sacrifice of his Son. Let me explain what I mean. John gives us here a living parable. You read other Gospels like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they tell actual parables, like stories that Jesus told, stories that are like a parable, a window, like an icon into these greater truths and realities. But John, instead of telling stories, he tells actual events, like events and things that Jesus did. And he shares details in these stories, and he emphasizes certain points to actually paint a picture, like a parable or an icon or a window into these greater realities of who Jesus is and what the gospel does. And in this picture, it ends with a master over the feast, like God the Father, who tastes the wine like the sacrifice of the Son, and tells the groom, like the Father says to Christ, this is better than everything that's come before. The Father is pleased with the sacrifice of the Son, who gives himself in self-giving love to reconcile the life of his world, to make us a bride, a people united with him forever as the groom, and to inaugurate and kickstart a wedding party where the wine is never going to run out, and the celebration goes on into eternity. I think this helps us explain why Jesus doesn't do the miracle at center stage, right? He does it here through the servants. You ask, why didn't Jesus just do it and everyone knows it's him? There's a couple of reasons. One is, I think he's being polite. He's letting the day be about the bride and the groom. He doesn't want to steal the show. He lets the spotlight stay on them. Jesus is humble like that. He's not a glory-hungry attention seeker who needs all the kudos. He's stoked to kind of let this day be about them, to be their wedding. But another reason here is I believe that Jesus is creating a living parable. He is sovereignly setting up the story and wants it to end with the master of the feast and the groom, and the master declaring that the best has been saved for last as he delights in the wine that has been brought. It's a picture of the gospel. My encouragement for us would be, don't miss the destination for the sign.